Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 11th of April 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. It's good to be back after a day off on Friday.
You had a day off?
Well, not exactly. A very interesting day, really. Learning about the NHS and how the government worked to help cover up the Staffordshire hospital scandal, but no doubt more on that in due course. Well, the weather here in Plymouth is just delightful. It's blue sky and sunshine. Norfolk is also the same. We understand it's a bit unpleasant in places like Glasgow and London, so we'll leave it there.
Okay, well, we're going to start with Guy Taylor and a bit of alert sent out this morning because if you remember a week or so ago, Guy appeared on the programme to discuss the fact that he had been taken from his home and brought to Aberystwyth court in order to face some kind of bogus charge, and he was brought back there yesterday. And he appeared in court, or perhaps this morning he appeared in court, and he came in front of a clerk, Michael Cray, and he was asked, or at least it was said by Michael Cray, that you pleaded not guilty, Mr. Taylor, referring to the previous hearing, to which Guy replied that there was no case to answer, in fact. Well, Michael Cray apparently didn't like that very much because he sent Guy down to the cells immediately on contempt of court charges. And then they proceeded to hear this case in Guy's absence. And that was after they had cleared the court of any members of the public. So this is pretty unprecedented, I think, Brian. And the other point that was made was that the clerk of the court, this Michael Cray, doesn't normally sit in this court. He was brought in especially for this hearing. The urge is for people to get in contact with Aberystwyth Court and ask what is going on. So
the clerk, to clarify, is usually a barrister or barrister qualified in a magistrate's court. So panic, and they seem very unsettled that Guy was there. So something strange going on, I think.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now I realise, of course, I've forgotten to say that we'll be having Mark Anderson from American Free Press with us today. Mark, very many apologies for not bringing you in straight away, but you've got up early in the morning again to join us. How are you?
Oh, fine. I'm one coffee into it, so we're good to go, guys.
Okay, that'll do. Well, thanks very much for being here.
Sure.
Well, we're seeing serious things unfold in UK because, of course, people who stand up to tell the truth have got to be squashed by the British state. And as Mike, you take us through the Panama scandal, it's becoming increasingly obvious as to why the government is so frightened of the truth.
The National Crime Agency now is demanding quicker access to offshore firm records. Now, if you remember what we said at the beginning of last week, was that this was going to be ushering in bigger use of big data and a globalized tax system. We believe that's been on the policy agenda for quite a number of years, certainly since the 2013 Bilderberg meeting, which we'll talk to Mark about in a second. But David Cameron feeling the pressure, at least appearing to feel the pressure. I don't think he's really feeling any pressure. He has announced a cross-government task force on the Panama Papers, an inquiry, £10 million. Another inquiry, Brian.
Well, we're very good at inquiring. We just don't get any proper truth
results
out of them.
Yes. So this is going to be led by HMRC experts. We'll come on to that in a second. And they have apparently tracked down £2 billion from offshore tax dodgers since 2010. And they're currently investigating 700 people who may have a link to Panama. That may or may not include David Cameron, I suspect not. But anyway, Cameron has announced this new task force and it will be jointly led by HMRC and the National Crime Agency. It draws on investigators, compliance specialists and analysts from HMRC, as well as the National Crime Agency and the Serious Fraud Office and the Financial Conduct Authority, all of whom have a steady track record of nailing people that have been naughty in the past, or not.
Or not, thank you.
Yes.
I was worried you weren't going to add that, Mike. The
Yeah.
or not is critical.
So Cameron has committed to providing resources, apparently £10 million, and between them, these agencies have some of the most sophisticated technology, experts and resources to tackle money laundering and tax evasion anywhere in the world. They don't seem to be able to prevent the banks laundering money on behalf of drugs barons, but that's okay. They're going to handle this, and they're going to report to the Chancellor and the Home Secretary, Theresa May, later in the year. At what point? Later in this year. Oh, it does say this year, not any other year, but anyway, we'll see. Here's what David Cameron had to say. The UK has been at the forefront of international action to tackle the global scourge of aggressive tax avoidance and evasion and international corruption more broadly. He then went on to say, there is clearly further to go, and this task force will bring together the best of British expertise to deal with any wrongdoing related to the Panama Papers. It's hard not to just burst out laughing, isn't it? And he said, this world-class operation will support the Chancellor and the Home Secretary on their strategy for taking action later this year when we will update Parliament. So there you go. Now, who's going to be in charge of this? Well, of course, it's going to be HMRC and it's going to be Edward Troop, who apparently has a wealth of tax experience. That's according to George Osborne. Just to give a bit of a background, Edward Troop, he is a freeman of the City of London. He ran the corporate tax practice of Simmons & Simmons, the law firm. This is the law firm that many of the mainstream media today are pointing out was central to advising David Cameron's father in the setup of his offshore shell companies. And he then became the special advisor to Kenneth Clarke when he was the Chancellor in 1995. And then when the Labour Party won the next general election in 1997, he went back to Simmons & Simmons, but he did continue to give some advice to the Labour government under Tony Blair. So he doesn't care. He's not particularly party political. He's only interested in tax evasion and tax avoidance. Now, as many of the mainstream media have pointed out, Simmons & Simmons' name appears in a lot of the emails and documents in the Panama Papers. But HMRC says it's quite all right because Troop has not personally dealt with the Panamanian company at the centre of this.
Yeah,
so
independent.
So there you go. Now, of course, we do know Simmons & Simmons ourselves, Brian.
Well, we do because back in 2010, Simmons & Simmons was kind enough to write to, to me really, Mike, but UK column obviously included. And this was on the matter of an intended action between Common Purpose and myself. I'll just read out the text. It may be a little bit small. It says, we act for Common Purpose on a pro bono basis, and we've been instructed to write to you regarding your pernicious campaign in the media against our client, its staff, and those who work with them. You've caused to be published on the internet and elsewhere a stream of malicious articles and other materials which attack Common Purpose, and in particular its founder, Julia Middleton. Your accusations are clearly baseless. We're just underlined, your accusations are clearly baseless. Now, this scurrilous letter from Simmons & Simmons included things I had said. It included a lot of things that I hadn't said. But one of the things it said was baseless was this: persons involved with our client are strongly suspected of encouraging paedophilia. Well, massive law firm there, very confident of itself. It says that my accusations are clearly baseless on the subject of paedophilia. Well, I'd just like to remind the public of this, because here we've got a gentleman called James Rennie, together with 7 other individuals. He was abusing children. A Common Purpose graduate, selected by Common Purpose as a future leader. This man, with his friends, was abusing children as young as 3 months. And of course, he was working within the secretive Common Purpose networks. And if you're not convinced by that, we better bring in Matthew Byrne. He was Common Purpose Liverpool Advisory Board member. So he was selecting which people should become Common Purpose future leaders. He was sent to prison for horrific assaults on prostitutes, whipping them so that their blood splattered the walls and then suffocating them. And he did that as a bit of a sideline to his some 9,000 child pornography images. So Matthew Byrne, selected by Common Purpose as an appropriate person to lead us into the future. And we just like to remind people that by an amazing coincidence, a local photographer took this picture of Matthew Byrne touching the Prime Minister. It's quite an extraordinary image. So there we are.
Well, in fact, David Cameron was giving him an award.
An award,
Yes.
yes, for his good work. But despite the fact that Common Purpose was alerted and warned of the fact that they were using trainers who were not properly police cleared, CRB checked at the time, neither did they appear to take any action to investigate whether Matthew Byrne or James Rennie had recruited other Common Purpose leaders. So Simmons and Simmons clearly very well informed before they write threatening letters about subjects they don't seem to know anything about.
And they had a connection to the Eden Project.
Well, we jumped through to Common Purpose is the way it works. And you've recently been to Eden Project, Mike.
Yes, I have. I was impressed to see this at the Eden Project. I just thought that was delightful.
This is Pan, isn't it? This is the god Pan. So this would have been orgies, bloodletting and orgies, merrymaking under the goddess god Pan.
Yes, and ripping animals to pieces apparently, because that's what humans do.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is for entertainment of families and children at the Eden Project.
Yes. So this will become clear why we're bringing this in a second.
Okay, well, we thought we'd just jump back as to what's been in the press. This was some time ago, and here's the gentleman. He's a NM Rothschild man, Sir Salts, and he was basically saying, well, we've had a few problems down at the Eden Trust, 6.3 million deficit, and visitors dipping below the million for the first time. So this was about 2014, and obviously the Eden Project was getting into a bit of trouble. So senior people had already moved on. This lady, Gaynor Coley, was the big boss. She was originally in charge of finance at Plymouth University, then took on 140 million for Eden. And on the right is Tim Smith. Now, Tim Smith, I believe, has been a supporter of Common Purpose, which is just quite interesting. But before we have a bit of comment on this, we just followed Gaynor Coley. What happened to her? Well, she abandoned the slightly leaky Eden Project and took up a new post at Kew, the Botanical Gardens at Kew. But she'd also got involved with Ignite, which is a new sort of social investment fund, which is going to do great things for society in relation to energy, and that is itself backed by Centrica. And we just found it interesting that one of the other key trustees at Kew is also involved with Centrica. And then, of course, that links back nicely into Marcus Agius, Bilderberger.
Yeah.
Bilderberger,
Yeah.
pretty powerful man. He's a big supporter of Ms. Coley, and he says, we look forward to this strengthening the working relationship between Kew and Eden. So Eden Project showing this pretty vile stuff for children. Visitor numbers dropped. I wonder whether the two could be related, Mike. But Ms. Coley moves on to Kew, and she's back in the same sort of circle. Is this just peculiarly British, Mark, or is this the merry-go-round of jobs that you see in the States as well?
Well, you see similar relations. I'm just now learning of the Eden Project as you guys are reporting it, although there are other statue and artistic expressions around the world that speak to a very low view of humanity, speaking to the very basis instincts, the very, moral cesspool, if you will, such as a statue in Oklahoma City that is in honor of a demon, basically, that was posted. Demonic kind of statues sprouting up around the world, things like that. It's pretty disturbing.
Well, you've mentioned, I think that was Baphomet in Oklahoma.
Correct.
But okay, we've got people in the chat room also reminding us that we've got the Baal Temple being erected in London and New York, and this is as a result of the so-called destruction of artifacts at Palmyra in Syria. So interesting, we've got Baal worship coming back in, promoted by government money. But just following through on the Salt saga brings us to this. Article in the Daily Mail, some pretty unpleasant photographs, but this is opera from the Royal Opera House, gratuitous scenes, sadomasochism, blood, murder, rape, and
Abortion, you said?
abortion or miscarriage, I don't know what. But the audience was so upset about it that many of them were booing at the end of the performance. So utterly vile stuff, most of it funded, of course, by public money, donations coming in. This is the boss. I just looked into the eyes of this man who's responsible for this performance, and I thought, interesting looking character. But I also just did the normal little bit. Let's go and have a look and see who's in charge. Well, of course, it's His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales. So he obviously thinks this is good value. And I look down and, well, surprise, surprise, Sir Anthony Salts pops up in the Royal Opera House. So very, very dark stuff being promoted by people who are supposedly the upstanding members of society, being promoted to Lord, Lady, to look after us and our children, of course.
Yes. Right. Okay. Let's come back to the Panama Papers then. The link was a little tenuous there. Can we say any more about that?
With regard
Salts
to what?
And the Eden Project and the Panama Papers,
Well,
and Simmons and Simmons.
Well, just, you know, I mean, what we've got is an amazing connectivity through the city with these very big, powerful people who are either legal people or bankers or Bilderbergers.
Yeah.
Once you start unearthing one, of course, they come up in a little cluster, which can't be accidental.
Indeed. So anyway, Cameron has decided he's going to announce a new tax evasion law for corporations. And what this is about basically is that if you are a company that employs people that are giving tax advice, and the tax advice that they give leads people to hide money in some kind of tax evasion mechanism, that those companies will now be liable to criminal prosecution. Well, what did he say about this? He said the government has done more than any other to take action against corruption in all of its forms, but we will go further, he said. So he went further by publishing his accounts for the last few years, and these are signed off by RNS. This is a schedule of taxable sources of income and gains. Now, last week we pointed out that he had, we showed the Independent article that said he had received £500,000 in rental money from tenants. Well, he doesn't seem to have, according to this document anyway. So either the journalists in the Independent were wrong, or there's something wrong with this. I'm not quite sure which it is.
Well, there was also the net worth of 35 million mentioned, Mike.
That's absolutely right. So there's no mention of that here either. What there is a salary of £120,000 in 2009 and £140,000 last year. Then we have some other income from rentals, which is about, looks like it's around £45,000 a year. Some interest payments, nothing on coming in from dividends on shares, nothing coming in from any other sources. And it says in this document that he has no other sources of income, either at home or abroad. So I guess everything must be in Sam's name then.
Well, I'm convinced, Mike. Obviously, we've got a prime minister that's really on the breadline. He's clearly suffering. I know he gets foreign holidays, but he's clearly suffering. And maybe we should start a whip around for our prime minister. Virtually destitute, unless it is Sam who's got the cash.
Well, indeed. But apparently, according to the Independent, we have to say goodbye to private lives. Now, this is an interesting article. What they're saying here is 5 years ago, this is Ian Burrell, and he says 5 years ago I had I heard a software billionaire, that must be somebody from Google, speak at a seminar arranged by Downing Street. It was a riveting discussion, but one thing in particular stuck in my mind, his warning that privacy would be dead within little more than a decade. The thoughtful entrepreneur was not saying this was good or bad, merely an inevitable legacy of the unfurling technology revolution. His message was that citizens, businesses, and governments should prepare for a world of total transparency. It's interesting that the sort of central tenet of this is that technology is driving us towards this, but of course it's not technology at all. Technology is just a tool, so it's people and policies that are driving us towards this. So he ends up by saying, academics have also pointed to the need for personal space to develop our characters, evolve our ideas, extend our friendships, and explore our relationships, yet at the same time ponder far more the implications of living in an age of full disclosure. So there's a number of points here. First of all is the whole question of whether somebody who has a public role, who is supposed to be there preventing or protecting the country, managing the country on behalf of the public, whether they have a right to a private life when they choose to take that career path, because obviously a private life can hide all kinds of ills.
Yeah.
And the other question is whether this drive to remove personal privacy is, in fact, to achieve exactly that point that Ian Burrell makes here, that the need for personal space is a need which is there to develop our characters. Now, if that's taken away and people don't get to develop emotionally and intellectually properly as they grow up, then that has a pretty detrimental effect on society as a whole.
That last point, Mike, is extremely interesting because, of course, we know that what's been going on in primary schools in particular is circle time, when very young children are encouraged to tell about things happening to them and happening at home, which are deeply personal. So in line with what you've just said, what we see going on in primary schools is to help break down the developing personalities of children. But what about Mr. Leveson? Because, of course, Lord Leveson was brought in to control the press, and many of the people campaigning for the need for those controls were senior politicians and people in the media spotlight saying we must have private lives.
Yes. Mark, what's your view on this issue?
I'll tell you this, what I'm hearing when they referred what you said, Mike, to a meeting 4 or 5 years ago where a technology whiz spoke of this idea that technology itself would overcome the idea of privacy, I couldn't help but thinking that could have been the Googleberg meeting.
Yes, I agree.
And it's interesting that this is coming up now because we're talking about the idea that we can't have any offshore tax havens anymore. And as you and I have been thinking, especially you guys, that the whole argument against tax havens is a kind of a ruse, if you will, so they can create a global tax infrastructure so there will be no place you can hide. And so the lack of privacy, the idea that there'll be no such thing as privacy, goes hand in hand with the idea that there's no such thing as perhaps cash. You know, maybe they'll have a cashless society and that'll be the next step, but no such thing as private enterprise, no such thing as you say, individual betterment. And one way to do that is to have this idea that the very idea of privacy will fade into the sunset. And that's a rather disturbing concept they're talking about. And it's interesting, too, that all this talk about there'll be no such thing as privacy anymore. But Bilderberg says, well, we've got to be able to meet off the grid, off the record. We can't be having press or regular people listening into what we're doing. We need to be able to feel free that we can talk about what we want to. And Googleberg, of course, was a direct sort of sibling of Bilderberg there for a while. I don't know if Googleberg is still meeting. And in fact, Google is now another company. It's kind of been subsumed into, I believe they're called Alphabet, if memory serves. And so this is more of the elite manipulation behind the scenes to get rid of all privacy except their own and to tax all money except their own.
Couldn't agree more. Now, typically before Bilderberg is a G7 meeting, and that G7 meeting is soon to happen in Japan. But as kind of a preemptive strike, as it were, the G7 foreign ministers meeting takes place, and that began yesterday. Now today they all went to Hiroshima to celebrate. Is celebrate the right word? They would say commemorate, but I think there was a bit more celebration there from their point of view. And John Kerry was there for the first time, I believe, and he was there to visit the Atomic Bomb Museum. And apparently a number of reports suggesting that Obama might go when he attends the full G7 summit next month. Now, there was no apology from John Kerry for the Hiroshima situation, the bombing of Hiroshima in 1945. Of course, it's widely recognized now, at least, that that was probably unnecessary. Kerry visited today. He said that it was stark, harsh, and a compelling reminder of the need to rid the world of nuclear weapons. And their first act then, the G7 foreign ministers, was to issue what they're calling the Hiroshima Declaration. They're calling for a world without nuclear weapons, and they're saying that nuclear weapons cause immense devastation and human suffering, and so on. So that's what they're up to. Now, Philip Hammond, of course, he wrote a little letter, and there it is, signed by him. And I'm going to suggest that Philip Hammond achieves the Hypocrite of the Month award. So at least so far, we're only a third of the way through April, so there's plenty of time. But here's a little excerpt from that. This is what he said. What is displayed here is a reminder to all of us of our obligations to resolve conflicts peacefully and of the unimaginable consequences for ordinary people of wars, which those who begin them, him, cannot control. So he recognizes that once they start a war, they can't control it anymore. He recognizes that people suffer, but he doesn't seem too worried about the fact that he and his government are responsible for Libya, Syria,
Afghanistan,
Yemen.
Yeah,
just to name a
Syria.
few. So the sheer hypocrisy is spectacular, isn't it?
I'm virtually speechless at this man, Mike, because these people are so disgusting. Clearly, they don't have any. They're not embarrassed. They don't have any conscience about what they're doing. They've got massive egos. They just spew the words out. But this was the man clamouring for war, wasn't it? Clamouring to get into Syria.
Have you any comments on that, Mark, before we move on to Bilderberg?
Well, I would add Dresden, what the Allied forces did to Dresden, where Bilderberg says they're going to meet. And the bombing of Dresden was perhaps one of the most merciless things in the whole annals of warfare. And apparently this is the first former Eastern Bloc city, the first time Bilderberg will ever have met in an Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc city, excuse me. But Bilderberg's been pretty shifty lately, as you guys no doubt have gathered. American Free Press, among others, but we kind of took the lead on it, announced initially that it looked like they were going to meet in Chantilly, Virginia. They've met there several times, usually always on U.S. election years, particularly presidential election years in the U.S. And it had looked like that until about April 9th, when all of a sudden the focus shifted away from them meeting in Virginia and Bilderberg itself announcing apparently more early than ever before that they're going to meet in Dresden, Germany, June 9 through June 12. It had looked like the third weekend in May, right before the G7. It looked like they were going to meet in Virginia, but now it looks like they'll meet after the G7. I believe the G7 is the last weekend in May, if memory serves. So me and some Swiss contacts, We Are Change Switzerland, are not altogether convinced of this Dresden thing. I mean, I guess in a way you can take Bilderberg's word for it, at least on the basic when and where. But let's just say I wouldn't call it a 100%er quite yet this early on. A lot of signs were pointing to them meeting in Virginia.
Mark, over the last couple of years, a number of people, even going back to 2013, a number of people have been suggesting that the official venue is not the actual venue. Well, and certainly your discussions with your Swiss colleagues seem to suggest that there's some speculation about this.
There has been for a number of years, going back to at least 2014 when they met in Denmark, Copenhagen. We might be getting a little glitch here, but at any rate, a lot of people, activists and journalists, whatnot, have been saying that in varying degrees over the last 3 to 5 years, especially. And there is some indication in the tax records of the American Friends of Bilderberg and in other areas, hints in the mainstream press, talk amongst activists, and so on and so forth, that Bilderberg might have more than one meeting a year. They might have broken up into committees, and they might have a show meeting, a meeting where they do some final decision making and world planning, and that's the one that the alternative press, such as yourself and myself and others, cover. But then that they have other preparatory and other meetings throughout the year, some of them perhaps in private homes, maybe some of them even video conferencing. Granted, I'm speculating, but there's just a realization that with modern technology and with circumstances the way they are, that these are very distinct possibilities. And as I say, there's a tax form that gives some hint to this possibility. It doesn't prove it hands down. I believe you guys have that form. I believe I shared it with you, but it's the 990 PF form that the American Friends of Bilderberg Incorporated has to file with the US IRS every year. And that's because the American Friends of Bilderberg being the contingent of the American part of Bilderberg, and they are a big part of the steering committee that plans the Bilderberg meetings. They're required to file this tax reform, and they're registered in the state of New York, of all things, as a charity. And I don't see Bilderberg as being a charity. I think there's some real thorny legal questions to be asked there. But this is where some of the indications come out about the possibility that they have other meetings, and maybe we can look at that form in a minute.
Right, you wanted to mention Jim Massini. This is a couple of years old. This article, what was in your mind here?
Well, Jim Messina went to Bilderberg 2015, and he now runs a major PAC, as I reported in the most recent American Free Press on page 14. He runs a major PAC now, and he's devoted, he says, to getting Hillary Clinton elected.
Now, for our British audience, a PAC is a political action committee.
Yeah, well, it's one of the super PACs now that's come out since the Citizens United ruling in early 2010 by the United States Supreme Court that treats corporations like people, and basically says that corporations can amass large amounts of money and funnel the money through PACs, these large political action groups, and support the electoral process, run ads against the opponent of someone they want, for example. So Messina has put his chips down on Hillary Clinton. He became a Bilderberg attendee in 2015, last year in Austria. And Hillary, as I mentioned in American Free Press recently, has been a darling guest of the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a major part of the Bilderberg network. There's strong indications, therefore, by the big hitters that Hillary, if she's not an absolute top choice for the big boys for U.S. president, she at least is being seen as a contender that they strongly support. And Messina is part of this network that is indicating millions and millions of dollars in strong philosophical support, connecting Hillary with the CFR and Bilderberg and the global elite network.
Okay, and the other person to talk about is Henri de Castries. And he has resigned from AXA. He's a senior Bilderberger, and it looks like he may be going to HSBC. I can't imagine why he'd be going there, but anyway, tell us a little about him.
Well, as many know, he's now the head of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, and that's that all-important group that plans where the Bilderberg's going to meet, decides what they're going to talk about, and decides who they're going to invite. And I share this with you guys kind of as an add-on. It's just an interesting development in the progression of Bilderberg and all the chess moves that they make, that this Frenchman who runs has been the head of this AXA, a large insurance firm, and who is head of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, and now he might head up HSBC, which I believe is British based or UK based. And it just shows the onward progression, the different goings on of the Bilderberg people, the big hitters in Bilderberg. So this is something that I felt was something to watch. Um, Whether it will affect his chairmanship of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, it's too early to tell. But I caught up with this guy at a Brookings Institution speech he gave last fall, and he had a lot of interesting things to say that talked about the progression towards consolidating the economy of the European Union even more, fiscal union, things like this, where budgeting and taxation functions of the individual EU nations would be merged in Brussels. He gave some hint to that. And so he's
An EU treasury, in other words.
yeah, correct. A central treasury was where some of the signage pointed in his talk. Although he was decidedly vague in some areas, of course, this is the way they talk. They talk in euphemisms. They use broad terms, and it's kind of a code speak. I call it globalese. That's my word for it. But Dick Castry is an interesting figure to keep an eye on, and that's why I shared that item today.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Let's talk about the BBC.
Well, of course, if we're talking Bilderberg, then we've got to be talking about manipulation of the media. And a big thank you to the person who sent in this email. It's talking about the BBC risking people's lives and aiming to sow dissent. In Iran. I'll just read out one of the paragraphs here. It says the article is promoting a website that initially was encouraging Iranian women not to wear the hijab. It is law in Iran that all women in public should wear a hijab, and the article states that the BBC helped to trend the group's first move encouraging this. Now the BBC is again trending this group and its new aim of encouraging female visitors to Iran to take photographs of themselves without the hijab and post it on social media. This is dangerous and devious on so many levels. First, it puts the women visitors to Iran who do this in possible danger from extremists and also from the Iranian government imprisoning them. Second, it sows discontent in Iran. So this was a pretty astute email, and this is what the person is referring to. So here we've got BBC News, BBC Trending, tourists join bareheaded protest against Iranian clothing laws. Well, of course, it isn't a clothing law, is it? This is a religious law, much the same way ladies in church are encouraged to wear hats. We can have a discussion on what that is about. But this is what the BBC, this is the text here I've put in initially is from the email, and then we follow it on. The campaign is the work of My Stealthy Freedom, an online movement which is no stranger to this particular act of defiance. This is the BBC talking. Almost 2 years ago, BBC Trending reported on the group's launch. Since then, the campaign has posted dozens of photos of Iranian women risking arrest by going out in public without the religious head covering. So there's the admission of what it is. And this is part of that website, My Stealthy Freedom. And this is further down in the website where it shows that back in 2015, the BBC had also got its nose in. So this is very dirty stuff, Mike. This is on par with the BBC's charity Media Action, boasting that it could get in and destabilise countries, talking about Syria in particular. And quite remarkable or not that we've now got the BBC helping to sow dissent in Iran. Mark, not an accident in my book. This is targeted BBC policy, and it would very much be Bilderberg policy.
Absolutely. At the World Bank, IMF, a meeting I covered back in 2011, there were huge posters or marquees on the walls that talked about empowering women, giving them a career life, and having banking based on that. And I covered a meeting where Robert Zoellick was speaking, and he, of course, is a Bilderberger, and at that time was head of the World Bank. He's also been the U.S. Trade Representative, and he said explicitly to the press that banking policy would be partially hinged, IMF loans and things like that, on how well a country liberates women. And it goes hand in hand with this to make them drop their religious principles, to make them eschew their traditions. And the notion, of course, it plays into people's pride and ego. But what it actually does is overturn the family. It encourages this idea that we have to have two breadwinners per home as a matter of an edict, not as a matter of family choice. And that, of course, leaves the children in limbo. And from there, we have this societal and social breakdown. So what the BBC is actually engaging in is cultural warfare along the lines of the IMF and the IMF and the World Bank.
Excellent summary there, Mark. And of course, in this country, where that so-called liberation of women has already been achieved, i.e. they're now as big a work slave as the men, we now move on to the fact that we're trying to normalise paedophilia. So we'll bring the BBC back in again. And thank you very much to another viewer who sent in this article over the weekend. BBC Radio Leicester couple Tony Wadsworth and Julie Mayer face child sex charges. And I'd tweeted that out with a little headline, nothing to worry about, nothing to see, move on, because that's what really the BBC said. So Julie Wadsworth, 58, charged with 7 counts of inciting a boy under the age of 16 to commit an act of gross indecency. But the charges relate to 4 children between the ages of 11 and 15. But the BBC says, well, of course, there's nothing to do with their conduct at the BBC. How would the BBC know, Mike? Because they couldn't even work out what was going on around Jimmy Savile. But there's an ongoing criminal process and we can't comment further. So the BBC oversees helping to destabilise peaceful countries. We might not like everything about them, but peaceful countries. And in the background, this is the BBC that has clearly been infiltrated by paedophiles for many years. The BBC, nothing to see. Hypocrisy, unbelievable.
Okay, the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, did you know we had one? So here we are. There's their website on the government webpage on the government website. They are launching a Stop Terrorists and Extremists online presence campaign.
Good.
And apparently on Friday, the 15th of April, which is this coming Friday, a 36-hour period of extended activity will take place to support the Stop Terrorists and Extremists online presence campaign.
Yeah.
There's no more to report because they don't tell us anything else. I'll read exactly what it says from the press release because it is staggering. It says, tackling extremist material is important to protect the public and prevent offences that incite or promote terrorism and extremism. From Friday, the 15th of April at 7 a.m., a 36-hour period of intensive activity will take place in the Counter-Terrorism Internet Referral Unit as part of the Stop Terrorists and Extremists online presence campaign.
Good.
That's it.
Well,
we don't know what they're doing. We just know that there's going to be a period of intense activity.
Run, hide, tell. So we're not going to do any of those things apart from tell the truth as to what these people are up to. So let's bring in the Plymouth Herald. That's one of Plymouth's local papers. Here's the headline: 125 arrested for offensive emails and tweets in Devon and Cornwall. But if you get into the article, it says that those 125 arrests were carried out 2010 to 2015, but they only achieved 14 prosecutions. So that means 111 people were innocent then, Mike.
Looks like it.
So Devon and Cornwall police so busy on social media arresting innocent people that, of course, they haven't got the men to get involved with having a look at the Jeanette Tate disappearance, murder as it's considered. And we keep asking this question: why are Devon and Cornwall police so aggressive about new evidence which has been brought forward to them? And we understand that new evidence includes the allegation that a former Devon and Cornwall police officer was involved in some way in Jeanette Tate's disappearance. But we've heard from both local sources and mainstream press that Devon and Cornwall police very, very aggressive when this new evidence, potential evidence, was brought forward. So we're waiting for more information on that. So if we haven't got terrorism under control, but we can put people arresting social media users, let's have a look at the serious stuff. Do this very quickly. NATO is to be replaced. It's going to be ditched. Trump said it was obsolescent or obsolete, and we've got to get ready for the EU military structure. His Trump, it was obsolete was the word he used. And at the end of last week, we were forwarded this new European Security and Defence logo, and you can see that NATO has been suppressed into the background. Mark, I don't know whether you would just like to comment on this one. Of course, Trump was very outspoken, saying that NATO wasn't capable of tackling terrorism. It needed to be changed, and if countries didn't want to pull their weight, they should be kicked out. It seems that from the American side, at least, the nudging is already happening to get rid of NATO.
Yes, I would like to comment, and this is a fairly new thought on my part. When I was in Washington recently, Trump spoke to the Washington Post, Bilderberg connected editorial board. To an extent, they are. And he told them that the U.S. should have a softer interventionist footprint, a softer military footprint. And he did refer to NATO as being more than it's worth, costing the U.S. more than it's worth, that we were not getting a return on our money and all our involvement. And the editorial board of the Post then suggested that Donald J. Trump, the lead.
Right, so we have a glitch there, unfortunately. Hopefully Mark will be back in a second. Let's just come back to that point in a second. We'll talk about the EU military then, because here we go. 5,200 UK and French personnel, 44 aircraft, including Typhoons and Rafale jets, 10 ships, one combined joint expeditionary force. So what's this about? This is an exercise. It's going to see UK-French headquarters planning and executing major land, sea and air activity for the first time in a demonstration of the force's full validation of concept. So this marks a significant milestone in the generation of a rapidly deployable force, they say, for bilateral operations ahead of any coalition action. Now, this was this force has been developed since the 2010 meeting in the ambassador's residence in Paris. This is the Lancaster House Treaty, as it's known, the one that was foisted on us without so much as a single comment in Parliament. Well, here's what Michael Fallon had to say. The joint force will combine the might of two of the world's biggest militaries, backed by our rising defence budget. It will enable us to deploy rapidly with our French allies, helping to keep Britain safe while contributing to the security of the world. So that's what Michael Fallon had to say. And the Standing Joint Force Commander, Major General Stuart Skeets, said, Exercise Griffin Strike, that's what it's called, marks a key milestone in the development of the Combined Joint Expeditionary Force, the embodiment of our military relationship with France. And he went on to say the next 2 weeks will see French and British servicemen and women training side by side on the sea, on land and in the air, together with Admiral Laurent Isnard, my French counterpart. We are anxious to demonstrate that our military partnership is now on a new level and show how the combined UK-France combined joint task force is the most testing of circumstances, stands shoulder to shoulder. There we go, Brian.
Well, this is treason, in my book at least, because, of course, this is British military command and control structure being subsumed into the French system. This is the start of the EU army, without question. And of course, they only need the Treasury, which Mark is mentioning, and the game is over whether or not there's an EU referendum.
Right, well, just before we bring Mark back then, let's look at a couple of pictures. This is the French gents leaving the aircraft. Here's some material coming off boats and so on. So they are bringing it all over. And just in parallel, sorry, Mark, I'll bring you in just 1 second. Just in parallel with that then, there is also Another exercise going on with 3,400 more NATO troops. This is exercise Joint Warrior and is completely separate from this one. And most of that is going to take place off the coast of Scotland. So Britain, the central sort of the core of the current range of exercises. Mark, bring us back to your thoughts there.
I was talking about Donald Trump, and I wanted to finish my thoughts. We had a slight technical glitch there. Trump had told the Washington Post editorial board recently when I was in Washington that he wanted to have a softer U.S. military footprint. We weren't getting the bang for the buck for NATO. And now I'm wondering, in light of what you guys are expounding on here, whether Trump knowingly, perhaps unwittingly, was making a case for reducing our footprint overseas, non-interventionist, as even the Washington Post called Trump's policy, but also whether he knowingly or unknowingly would, that is, almost make the case for not really getting rid of a European army per se, but closing out or depleting NATO a little bit and then replacing that with this EU army. So you have to wonder whether there's something rhetorical going on Trump's part. Does he really mean just, pull back on U.S. involvement in NATO? We don't need NATO anymore? Or is this all just an elite move to displace NATO and put in their place the EU army that you guys see evidence that is forming? So based on Trump's comments, we need to, and the Washington Post comments, we need to look at what this is. A phasing out of NATO and its replacement, or is it just a phasing out of NATO without a replacement? I mean, we need to really look at this into the near future.
Well, I think we're going to have plenty of opportunity to do this. The speed, though, which is moving this side of the pond, Mark, is quite incredible. And we've been getting quite a lot of information from the London end to say that some very senior, mainly retired British military people are stunned to discover how far these plans have gone. A few months ago, they were saying that means senior military people, would never accept it, and now it's just being shown as fait accompli. So no debate at all in Westminster about this 50-year defence pact with the French. What we can now see is that, of course, that had to be kept secret because this was one of the key points of the last building block of the EU superstate, its own military. But interesting to see whether NATO is completely pushed out. I don't see how this can be done because, of course, if they believe Russia is the threat they say it is, then Europe still needs American military muscle to cope with it, and they particularly need the American command and control structure. So we'll need to watch it and report, I think. Sorry, come in, Mark.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to add that we might be seeing a dialectic here a lot like with the tax havens. They say, well, we can't have all this tax evasion, but that's really a ruse for a global tax structure. And this anti-NATO talk that you hear in some quarters, including Trump and whatnot, could be, again, a dialectic, a ruse to create a different kind of European army, the EU army. And NATO would either be replaced or kind of subsumed. In other words, NATO could be kind of converted into the basis or core of the new EU army. So we have dialectics working in two areas here, the tax havens and possibly in the military realm.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. We'll end on a positive note. People always want to know what they can be doing. Well, of course, as far as the EU referendum goes, we've got an independent committee. Yes, it really is, set up by Dave Barmby, who did all of that fantastic work showing the treason of our original entry into the European Economic Community. And he, with his committee, has been challenging the EU referendum organisation because he's deeply concerned that we're going to see vote rigging, and in fact we're already seeing bias. So this letter has gone out. I'll put out the second part of it. Obviously you can freeze your screen to have a look at what it says, but this is the meat of it. He is saying to the lady in charge of the EU referendum, thank you for your letter dated the 1st of April. Unfortunately, your letter failed to address the serious issues raised in the committee's letter of 29 March. And since the referendum date draws ever closer, room for making changes to procedures and practices becomes ever more fraught. So the battle's been taken straight to the people running this EU referendum PSYOP by saying to them, we can already see the corruption and the bias, and of course that will be followed by vote rigging. So there was an email address for Dave Barmby if you'd like to get involved with his committee to support and of course to alert other people, do get in touch with him. I think we'll end on that one, Mike, actually.
Just one announcement. Remember that Ian Crane is not with us this week, so there'll be no live programmes this evening. Ian will be back next Monday at 7:30 as usual.
Okay. Well, there we are. Things in Britain moving on very quickly. Mark, thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to having you on again, and we will cover some of those NATO issues. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be back same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.